You guys wanted to get the details on this whole Florida congressman threat situation right. Well, buckle up because we are diving into a political rivalry so heated it makes Miami summer look like a winter wonderland. We've got our stack of articles and court documents right here. And let me tell you, this deep dive is about to get juicy.
Oh, yeah. This one is a doozy.
So picture this. It's 2021. The Sunshine State is living up to its name, and two names you need to know. Paulina Luna and William Braddock III are facing off in the Republican primary for Florida's 13th congressional district. Sounds pretty ordinary, right?
Sure.
Except Braddock is accused of threatening Luna's life, even allegedly saying she was like a dead squirrel you run over every day.
Yeah. And let's be honest, we've all seen those Florida man headlines, right? But even for the Sunshine State, this story takes the prize. I mean, threatening an opponent. That's practically stepping on the alligator's tail in the world of Florida politics.
It's intense. So before we get into the absolute thick of it, I'm curious about the political climate back then. Was this level of animosity unusual, even for Florida?
Well, remember, this was right after the 2020 election, so tensions were already running high across the country, and Florida, with its history of razor-thin elections and passionate voters, was like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Add to that the fact that Luna was, and still is, a staunch Trump ally in a district with a significant Republican base, and you can see how things could get a little heated.
Okay, so high stakes, a lot of pressure, and two ambitious politicians vying for the same seat. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. And to make matters even more interesting, Luna ended up winning that 2022 election. So we're not just talking about a random primary spat here. This involves a sitting member of Congress.
Wow. So this wasn't just political theater. Luna was actually concerned about her safety. This completely changes the lens through which we're looking at this, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This situation raises some serious questions about the safety of political candidates and elected officials, especially in today's climate.
It's a scary thought, honestly. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's rewind back to those specific allegations against Braddock. What exactly did he allegedly say? And how did this all come to light? I mean, people say things in the heat of the moment all the time, but this sounds next level. Okay, so we got these political rivals, a heated election, and some pretty strong accusations. But how did this all go from like 0 to 60? What's the smoking gun here?
Well, according to reports and the documents he sent over, Braddock's alleged threats came to light through a phone call that happened to be recorded by one of Luna's friends.
Oh, man. Talk about being caught on tape. What are the chances?
Right. And this wasn't just any recording either. Politico actually obtained it. And let me tell you, it's chilling stuff.
I bet. So what did he actually say? Don't leave us hanging.
Okay. So in this recording, Braddock talks about not wanting to end anybody's life. But then he adds, if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. And it gets worse. He goes on to call Luna a effing speed bump in the road and a dead squirrel you run over every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's intense. I mean, if it needs to be done, that's pretty ambiguous, even without the rest, and kind of unsettling.
Exactly. Legally speaking, there's a fine line between tough talk and a real threat. It's all about context.
So how do you determine intent? Like, is there a legal precedent for these kinds of cases?
Absolutely. There's a whole body of law surrounding what are called true threats. Basically, it's not enough to just say something menacing. Prosecutors have to prove that a reasonable person would interpret the statement as a serious intent to commit violence.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but also the surrounding circumstances.
Right.
And how, like, a reasonable person would perceive them.
Exactly. And in this case, there's even more to consider. Because this wasn't an isolated incident, Luna actually accused Braddock of stalking and threatening to kill her back in 2021 while filing for a restraining order.
Wait, hold on. So this wasn't just a one-time thing in the heat of the campaign. There was a history here.
Right. This wasn't just a case of two candidates trading barbs. Luna and a friend, who was a conservative activist, claimed that Braddock's behavior was escalating and they were granted a temporary restraining order against him.
Interesting. So the legal system was already involved. What happened with the restraining order?
Ultimately, a permanent restraining order was denied. The details of that decision aren't public, but it does add another layer to this whole saga.
It definitely complicates things. We've got this recorded threat, past allegations, and a temporary restraining order. It sounds like there was some genuine fear on Linda's part.
Yes, and that fear seems justified given what happened next. After the threats were made public, Braddock left the U.S.
He disappeared, like vanished into thin air.
Well, not exactly thin air. He was found living in the Philippines 2 years later.
The Philippines? Talk about an unexpected turn. It's like something out of a political thriller. How did they even find him there?
That's the million-dollar question. It took 2 years to bring him back to the U.S. to face charges, which tells you something about the complexity of the situation.
2 years is a long time. What was the holdup? It's not like they could just extradite him overnight, right?
Yeah.
2 years is a long time. It's not like they could just extradite him overnight, right?
No, not at all. Extradition is incredibly complex. It's like navigating a maze of international laws and diplomatic relationships. You've got treaties to consider, different legal standards in each country. It's a delicate dance, and it often takes time, especially when you're dealing with a country like the Philippines.
So it's not as simple as just asking nicely for someone back.
Definitely not. Imagine trying to get a friend to return a borrowed book, but your friend lives in another country with its own rules about lending. It's a process.
That's a great analogy. It makes so much more sense now. But while we're on the topic of complicated timelines, there's another layer to this story we haven't even touched on yet. Recently, Luna's office received another threat, and this one was described as a very serious shooting threat. Do you know anything about whether this new threat is connected to Braddock, or are we talking about a completely separate issue?
As of right now, there's no concrete evidence linking Braddock to this recent threat. It's entirely possible that it's completely unrelated, but you can understand why people might be drawing parallels. The timing is definitely eyebrow-raising.
Totally. It makes you wonder if this is part of a larger pattern. I mean, we hear about threats against political figures all the time these days. It's scary to think about.
It's a disturbing trend, that's for sure. There's been a noticeable increase in threats against politicians, both here in the U.S. and globally. It's not something to be taken lightly.
It feels like the stakes have never been higher. And it's not just about protecting individual politicians. It's about safeguarding our entire democratic process, right? If people are afraid to run for office or voice their opinions because they fear for their safety, that undermines the very foundation of our system.
Precisely. It creates a chilling effect on free speech and political participation. And Luna herself has spoken about this, saying that this division and hate campaign against Republicans is going to get someone killed.
She clearly feels like this is part of a larger pattern of escalating hostility towards her party. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And to complicate matters even further, Luna's Democratic opponent in the upcoming election recently called her a threat to democracy.
Oof. Talk about pouring gasoline on a fire.
It highlights how charged the political climate has become. Words have power, and this back-and-forth rhetoric can have dangerous consequences.
Absolutely. Speaking of consequences, let's talk about potential legal ramifications. What are we looking at if Braddock is actually convicted of making those threats against Luna?
Well, right now, he's facing 1 count of interstate transmission of a true threat to injure another person. That charge carries some serious weight. If he's found guilty, he could be looking at up to 5 years in prison.
5 years. That's not a slap on the wrist.
Definitely not. Of course, the actual sentence would depend on various factors. His past criminal history, the specifics of the case, it's all still unfolding.
This whole situation is like a political thriller with twists and turns you wouldn't believe. I can't wait to see what happens next, both legally and how this all plays out in the court of public opinion.
It's a reminder that truth is often stranger than fiction, especially in the world of politics. And it forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions about the state of our political discourse and what we can do to ensure that disagreements, no matter how heated, don't escalate into violence.
This has been a wild ride. Thanks for guiding us through this incredibly complex case. It's definitely given us a lot to think about.
The pleasure was all mine. It's cases like this that remind us of the importance of staying informed, engaging in respectful dialogue, and protecting the integrity of our democratic processes.
Well, folks, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating and, frankly, unbelievable stories from the world of politics. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe out there.
Turn the dial to the daily news. Turn the dial to the daily news. Turn the dial to the daily news. Bringing voices, headlines, and choose. You turn the dial to the daily news.